What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of ALLSMITH. Today's guest is helping world-class athletes become world-class leaders in life, relationships, and business. He's an incredible explorer in the realm of emotional intelligence, masculinity, and life beyond sports. Today, I'm excited to introduce Q Williams. Welcome to the show, man.
What's up, brother? Good to see you.
Dude, I'm stoked to have you on. I was really excited to kind of read those things through because you're in it. Like, you're doing the thing. You're exploring the thing. You're navigating the thing. And sometimes it's a great reminder of, wow, I've done those things. I'm doing those things. And here we are.
That's what I'm feeling right now. I've never been introduced that way. I appreciate you for seeing me, man. Yeah, man. It's an adventure.
That's the secret sauce of what ALLSMITH is and what this podcast is granting people the permission to be more vulnerable and allow people to be seen, heard, and understood, not just for what they do, but for who they are. And I'm excited to unpack that with you today because we've had some epic conversations on the phone. We've met in person. We've been playing ping pong, trying to figure something out. Mm-hmm. And then spontaneous text last night like, hey, man, let's just do the thing.
Let's just do this thing, dude.
Yeah,
Rip the Band-Aid off, they say.
Totally. And we talked about it a little bit this morning, and that was that famous Mark Manson quote. For those of you that don't know Mark Manson, he's the author of an incredible book known as The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And there's a double-edged sword there, right? Like, I'm not saying to not give any fucks where you're like bastardizing society and ending up in prison. But I am saying to like go against the grain a little bit and challenge societal norms and not necessarily just conform to everything because it's popular opinion. And he put up an amazing post that I think resonated with both of us, which is thinking and learning is the procrastination of smart people. And it's like, dude, we do this all the time. Mm-hmm. Let's just dive into the deep end and either sink or swim.
Exactly, man. For context, we've been thinking about how can we strategize how we do this podcast because you're so passionate about what I do. I'm so passionate about what you do. And I'm like, how can we make this really synergistic and how can we make it really fit?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's going to fit. If you just do it, it's going to fit. You know, it's not about it being a certain way or something like really over-designed and overcomplicated. So I'm really excited to just dive in.
Totally, man. When we define some of those terms, one of the terms that you have in your Instagram bio is helping world-class athletes become. Something that I've said throughout this podcast is stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. And we're always talking about becoming, which has positive and negative attributes, which we loosely described this morning. But when you think about world-class athletes, what does world-class kind of mean to you? Because there's varying levels to that definition for sure.
Yeah. Well, to most people that read that bio or read that statement, like you know, it comes off as like, oh, there's this status. There's this sense of like, oh, I'm like better than. As an athlete, we're constantly kind of comparing ourselves. You know, it can be very easy to compare ourselves, at least. I was just on a call with about 10 athletes yesterday, and a lot of them struggle with that. Like when I'm setting my goals in my real life, how do I know what is, you know, world class, or how do I know what's going to be my 10 out of 10 as it relates to my finances, as it relates to my career? How do I know when I'm succeeding, you know? And that's why actually I use the term world class, because it's actually a play on words. Like we're supposed to learn, like we're going to class about the world, about how we're supposed to end up in the world.
Okay.
And so
I like that a lot.
Like, yes, you want to end up feeling world class. It's a feeling, it's a sensation. It's like, it's not really a status, but I get why people go there, you know? It's really about like the internal feeling of like feeling in your wheelhouse, feeling in your groove, feeling like aligned with who you are internally and not expressing itself externally. Because the beautiful thing is about being an athlete, you were a world-class athlete because that was the one channel that your internal, you know, core identity was able to express itself best in that phase of life. And I think a big part of my work is reminding people of who they are at the core, coming back to that now that they've been down this channel for so long, come back home and realize what got you there. It wasn't all the achievements. It wasn't all, I mean, yes, the practice, all those things, but there's something in you that made you incredibly effective, that makes you, that no one can take from you. And when you align with that, I was asking these athletes yesterday too, like when you align with that core identity with who you are, and I have a practice that helps them understand what that is and clarify that. They all say to me like, anything's possible from this place. Literally anything's possible. Like when all the things that I want, all the things I've said I want. And it's such a relief to be like, wow, I can have that world-class feeling in life beyond the game, because most of us feel like we can't.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very well said. I like the play on words.
Yeah.
That's really
I don't
cool.
talk about that one much, but yeah, that was part of the inspiration. It's like you're learning, it's going back to class for how do I show up in the world?
Yeah. And I like that a lot. I definitely think I'm going to challenge you to do more media on that so people can better understand that, because I like that better than the status symbol that is perceived from just reading the words, which isn't necessarily from you. It's based on my own ideation of what that phrasing associates with.
Yep.
And that's cool to gain that context. That's why I love podcasts.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an opportunity for me to make a little paradigm shift there.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. When you're thinking about that core identity and where athletes think, hey, this is my channel to do the thing, what comes to mind for me is love. When I do this thing, I get love from mom and dad, or I feel safe in my environment, or I get notoriety from my tribe, or I get validation in the local newspaper, or somebody gives me free gear. Now in the world of nil, maybe somebody pays me at a young age.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody with a phone is capturing content, and I'm starting to gain some traction from a social media sense. There's varying angles. It's not a blanket statement that it's all the same. But where does that intrinsic motivation kind of begin for most people, in your opinion? Like, how do they think, oh, if I just do this thing, I'm going to be loved in return?
Well, I'd have to ask, is that intrinsic or is that extrinsic? You know, like that's the tough part, because like when I was 7 years old, I talk about this moment a lot, when I went to my first organized baseball practice, my first organized sports practice ever. And I'm throwing, you know, on the left field line. I'm throwing back and forth. I'm scared shitless it's going to go over his head. It does a few times, you know. And he throws it back. It goes over my head. And then all of a sudden there are coaches behind me, like kind of like gather up. All the parents and the coaches are like standing there and they're like talking. And I'm like, what are they saying? Like, what's going on back there?
You have that awareness, and you have the like peek out of the corner of your eye that you're like curious as to what's going on in your environment.
Yeah, because you're just as I'm mostly scared that the ball is going to go over my head. It's going to hit one of them and I'm going to be in trouble, or like I'm going to screw up. You're thinking of all the ways that I could screw this up and I could like totally fail. But a moment later, they say, hey, Quentin, nice arm. Nice work. And it was in that moment, I realized, oh, I might have something here. Like I'm getting acknowledged for something that I can do. I have a skill. I have a gift, right? And I mean, I took that and ran with it. You know, I just continued to pour myself into that. And, you know, it's such a double-edged sword, because of course you have a skill, but what allowed me to wield that skill, wield that gift was, I mean, so many people are born with talent, but they don't wield it. You know, they allow society standards or mental roadblocks to get in their way from actually wielding that sword, whether it's athletically, professionally, socially, in their life. And so for me, what made me a great athlete wasn't just being talented, you know what I mean, and having the great genetics that I did, but it was like the level of so my core identity, I bring it down to 3 words: joyful, adventurous, and responsible. And those 3 words mean so much to me than just those 3 words. But like when I come from that place and I show up on the baseball field that way, or the football field, or in my career, literally anything's possible. And so I think in that moment when I realized I had a gift, you know, I had a great father, great mother, great, you know, support system that supported me in like continuing that vision. But honestly, it was really just me leading from joy, adventure, and responsibility, you know, leading from a place of leadership, like taking initiative, having fun, like being joyful, being like rambunctious, and like keeping it light as well. And then, you know, being adventurous with like trying new things, being open to like coaching and criticism, and like trying on different hats. And I think without those three things, I don't know if I would have been the baseball player or the football player I ever was.
Move fast and break shit. LSKD develops functional sportswear with a streetwear aesthetic that's on a mission to inspire you to chase the vibe through sport, fitness, and adventure. I train daily in the rep shorts and love the versatility they offer. The zipper pocket is an absolute game changer. I go from training at the gym directly to meetings, running errands, or prepping for podcasts. The LSKD tribe has become true family, and we are excited to continue to develop our community. Shop now at lskd.com and use code ALLSMITH. We chase the vibe here at ALLSMITH. Let's all become 1% better every day. I want to jump in right there and kind of explore that a little bit. The word that comes to mind for me is the word belief. And it sounds to me in that moment, your first organized circumstance associated with sport, it almost seems like you felt belief from people that you held in high regard.
Yeah.
Did that come from your parents? Like, did you grow up with siblings? Like, where was the original belief associated where you mentioned exposure to lots of different things, being rambunctious.
Yeah.
You were granted the permission to explore and play and navigate in Q's sandbox.
Yeah.
But it's like not everybody has that opportunity. So I'm like curious at the onset of the planting of the seed where you got to navigate different planes of motion. You got to try different grips on the ball. You got to throw far. You got to throw short. You got to throw fast. You got to toss the ball.
Yeah.
Like where were some of these things formulated for you specifically? Because it'll give us a little bit of insight to better understand context for other people.
Well, God bless my dad. He, you know, I mean, this goes into a big part of my story and a big part of my theories and beliefs and what I've found in working with so many athletes is it's usually a coach, a father figure, or a parental figure or guide that either believes in us in a certain way or pushes us in a certain way. And, you know, I think in that moment I found that there were some people that believed in me. There were some people that saw I had a good arm, and I went and, you know, I was like, oh, I was interested in this. And then my dad pushed me to the brink, pushed me incredibly hard. And I would look around at my other teammates and be like, they're not being pushed this hard. They're not being pushed like this. This is unfair, or all those different things. But I mean, it made me the man that I am. And, you know, in many ways, I believe a lot of men, especially, and this happens for female athletes too, I think we find that connection, that sense of love, especially from the father figure in our lives, from what we can do, from how we respond to that push, how we show up to that. And it's such a juxtaposition to the feminine of maybe the mother or maybe another parental figure that's there to support and love unconditionally. You have this masculine that wants to love almost conditionally. You know, a lot of father figures or coaches will love you conditionally. They're going to love you for your potential. And that can be very, it motivates us, but it doesn't necessarily motivate us intrinsically. We're trying to prove something. We're not getting that love from maybe the masculine figure or just people in our life. And so we have to find some way to fill that void, either by performing and responding well to that push, or seeking it elsewhere. Unfortunately, a lot of men seek it elsewhere, and they find numbing and coping strategies in different ways. They even try to find that love through women or exploration and domination in other ways, toxic ways. You know, I have my own toxic patterns that I think have come from that push and my response to that push. I think overworking, not being able to relax, not being able to settle, not being able to feel like it's ever going to be enough in some ways. I've really had to battle with that because that sort of conditional love was what I experienced a lot. And like I mentioned, it pushed me. It pushed me to the brink. It pushed me so far, and it made me the man and athlete that I am and the hard worker. And there's a limit to how effective that can be. You know, I say a lot, you know, things like that, like high performance mentality and mindset, it only works until it doesn't. until you burn out.
Yeah.
You know?
The famous line, self-reliance is everything.
Yeah.
This is what I did to get from A to B, but that's not necessarily how you get from B to C.
Yep.
And it's a paradox to the mind in theory, where it's like, wow, like this has worked in my entire life. If I just push harder, sacrifice more, do more, be more, commit more, it's going to get me to the thing. And then when that doesn't work anymore, you're lost.
Yeah.
You feel like the world doesn't understand you. You start to turn to poor coping mechanisms, as you described. And it becomes this internal battle of deconstruction of the ego, which is very large and in charge when you've been a high performer for 20 plus years in the realm of sport, whether that's collegiately, professionally, wherever you land on the ranks.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thought process to explore. And I heard you mention, we talked about a little bit this morning, I think the topic that we're exploring is toxic productivity, which is wake up earlier, stay later, just do more, make all the sacrifices. But then you think to yourself, do you have the thing or does the thing have you? Do the inputs match the outputs? And eventually you get to a point, and we see this at the end of high performers' careers. I'll just use LeBron as an example right now. He's played in the NBA for almost 20 years. He is incredible. But we're watching the NBA Finals right now. The Lakers aren't in the NBA Finals.
Yeah.
Do the inputs match the outputs?
Right.
And I think there's a healthy conversation to be had there around, what does he want? What does he want his legacy to be? What's the goal? Is it to wait for Bronny to get the NBA? Is it, some sort of external legacy? We just saw Jerry West recently pass away. So it's like, will LeBron be the next logo? I don't know. It's a fair conversation to have. It's a possibility. Something to kind of tinker with. Yes, no, maybe so. But, it's worth tossing out there. But the point that I'm making is the major question that I think not just men should ask, but all people should ask is, what do I want? What do I want my life to look like? And then let's work backwards from there and create a generalized roadmap, knowing very well it's not going to follow exactly. We're going to have to practice the art of adaptability. We're going to have to call audibles on occasion. But the mission needs to remain the mission. And if the mission changes, then the roadmap changes.
Yeah.
And so for you, when you get to this fork in the road and you recognize that, okay, this person's career is changing, not even that it's done, it's changing. Where do you start with a high-performing athlete that's like, dude, you don't get it. I've been crushing it my entire life. This is the way I've done it. How do you get them to pause, zoom out, and provide time and space to like, okay, that is the way you've done it. But if you always do what you've always done, you'll always be what you've always been. You're not that anymore.
Yeah.
How the fuck do we move forward?
Yeah.
So what's your process there to identify that, create buy-in to somebody that's already keeping you at arm's distance and like still not able to deconstruct their ego?
Oh, yeah.
How do you get in? How do you get past that front?
That's honestly one of the toughest things about working with former pros is like they tend to have this strong ego. And
it's served them for so long.
Yeah. And at that level, you do have to keep people at arm's distance because you can't trust everybody.
Yep.
With your time, your energy, your money. That's for sure. And so, I've worked with former NFLers, for instance, and the ego's strong. What tends to happen is you're a high performer. You literally identify with being a workhorse, and hard work is like your identity. And so when you come out of sport and you don't have something to put that hard work into, same thing for me. Like when I was an athlete, I thrived off of like using my anger. Like I would play really angry and really passionately. I'd like let it loose. Like the goose was loose on the fucking field, man. And I just had a motor. And when I didn't have a channel for that motor after sport, like I didn't have something to do with it. Like I just wanted to be put to good use. And I think so many masculine men want that. We just want to be put to good use. We want to be utilized, right? And so when working with former NFLers, for instance, often they just want something, anything to do. And they also want it to be the right thing, but they just want someone to give them the playbook and give them directions like they're used to. The thing about that is that 20-year ego was developed out of that same structure, out of having a playbook, knowing when to show up, knowing what to do, knowing what's going to lead to this level of success. And honestly, if I had to put it clear, like most athletes, when they reach that pinnacle, it's not nearly as fun as they expected it to be. You don't have that many guys that reach like the Jason Kelsey status where like they just love their fucking career. You know, you have a lot more examples of like Darren Waller where it wears off, and he just ended up retiring a couple days ago. You know, like the edge or the excitement, it wears off, and you realize you've gotten to this pinnacle moment of your career, and it's not as cool as you thought it was going to be. Why is that? Usually because you've been doing it for the wrong reasons. We've been trying to prove something. We've been trying to play with a chip on our shoulder.
It's interesting that you say that, and I agree with you. If you can provide incentive, you can then predict behavior.
Yes.
And I think what's interesting is as you progress, the incentive changes. The original incentive is to play well so you can win the game, celebrate with your teammates, hugs with family and friends.
Yeah.
And like realize and self-reflect, man, that was dope when I was making those shots or catching that ball or making that tackle. And as you progress, it's, oh, if I do the thing, I'm going to make the money. Mm-hmm. Or if I do the thing, I'm going to get the next contract. Or if I do the thing, I'm going to get more social media followers. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to be higher in the ranking. It becomes focusing on the things that are in our control to focusing on the things that are outside of our control. You could have a great game, but maybe you're just not that marketable.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, somebody else who didn't have a game as good as you is now getting the notoriety, and you could be left frustrated.
Yeah.
And I say specifically frustrated, and not the verbiage, you could be left with nothing, because you're still enrolled in the process. Mm-hmm. And I think that comparison that we discussed previously becomes very difficult. Because there is this metric associated with money, with the measurables of success.
Yes.
But not all success is measurable. Sometimes it needs to be felt. Yes. And that's the lost art in life after sport.
It's a lost art in our culture. I mean, arguably, it's just most present in life after sport. You're absolutely right. Because where I'm going with this is exactly where you're headed, which is like, in sport, a lot of us played sport and reached that pinnacle moment, sometimes to prove something, sometimes to achieve and feel a certain way, maybe. But when we get there, you know, the motivations change, and we realize, oh, this doesn't feel like I thought it would. It's usually because we've been trying to perform or prove something. And in essence, what that means is we didn't really know why we were doing it in the first place. We didn't have a clear purpose for it. It was just to do it. It was because, oh, that's what was expected of me. That's what was going to get me love or affirmation. Or it's like, why wouldn't you do that? Most people would kill for a chance to go and play in the Big Ten or play in the NFL or the NBA. Like, why? Of course I'm going to do that. When I had the chance to go play in the NFL, I didn't pursue it that heavily, like, because it wasn't my thing, you know, like, and I think more people need to come to that realization and be honest with themselves. And I think when you're transitioning into life beyond the game, that's the question I have to ask guys is like, what are you doing this for? Like, what have you been doing this for? And more importantly, when it comes to like me trying to get you wanting me to give you a playbook or like tell you what to do next, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give you a playbook. I'm not going to give you direction. That's what you've been given all your life. In many ways, it's been a subtle art of control and manipulation that this culture has created an environment for you to succeed. But I don't know what's going to help you feel successful in your life outside of the game. I don't know what that's going to be. You're used to not making your own decisions. You're used to those decisions and the schedule being outlined for you. This is the season of you starting to choose yourself, which starts with knowing yourself and asking yourself that same question you brought up, which is, what do you want? Mm-hmm. And so
I like that you do that. It forces
Yeah.
people to think.
The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level.
And
Yeah.
that's very difficult for a wide variety of reasons. Let's just paint the picture of a Division I athlete. Like you said, here's your schedule. Here's when you're going to be in the weight room. Here's your class schedule. Here's when film's going to be. Here's your time allotment for food or meals. Here's your allotment for rehab or prehab or when you're going to get taped up or get treatment. Here's when study hall is going to be. Here's when you're going to have meetings with your specialty coaches. Here's practice times. And you need to figure out how to show up, be early, not just on time, but be early, accomplish all of these tasks, and do it consistently 6 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
It's freaking hard to make it happen. When you're in it, you're almost like craving space. You're looking for gaps in the in-between or buffer zones to try not to go to the next thing. But what almost happens for most people is when they're given time and space, they either make magic or they make bad choices. And I think life after sport, when that structure is not allocated anymore, you've been so structured your whole life and it's been so streamlined and pressure oriented that when you get a little ounce of space, you're almost just like, oh my gosh, I need to breathe for a second. I'm just going to take this break away from all structure.
Yeah.
And I'm going to allow myself to just spread my wings and float like a buoy that's not tethered to an anchor for a little bit. And then you do that and you realize, all right, like I enjoyed that for like a week.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm trying to figure out a little bit of direction. I think what's beautiful about organized sports is that it does provide parameters. It does provide a way forward. It does give you, these are the rules and the orientations. I mean, look at social media. The posts from thought leaders that hit the hardest, do these 10 things and you'll get the thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like you look at the cover of like Men's Health and it's like, do these 3 things and you'll get 6-pack abs.
Yeah.
People want the answer to the test. They want the playbook, but they don't actually want to think. And I think that just goes back to a little bit our education system, which is memorize these things, take the exam. The exam is then going to quantify a score. That score is how I'm going to rank you. Mm-hmm. How I rank you is where you're going to be labeled based on your other classmates. And if you do well, you're going to progress to the next level of the game.
Yeah.
And if you don't do well, then you'll be over here.
Right.
But that's such an old school ideology that's now evolved to, okay, like we do have some structure and organization with regards to school. But I think the next iteration is how do we critically think in the in-betweens of those steps 1 through 10? Mm-hmm. How do we think in step 1.5 that we can't quite see? And that right there is EQ. That's emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I want to explore with you next. Like I want to hear your thoughts on just that memorization concept in the education system and the removal of the playbook.
Yeah.
And what you've seen with some of these high performers that are like thinking they have it figured out because they've crushed it following all the rules and regulations. But then when the rules are taken away, they're like, uh-oh, I'm not really sure where to begin.
Yeah. This reminds me really quick of something that happened when we went to war in Iraq. There was a general named General McChrystal. He ended up starting a consulting business, and I'll tell you why, which was because we were losing a lot of that war, of course. And the reason we were losing is because we were reliant on a set of structures and bureaucracy within our military, right? So there's a top-down mentality. It was said in football too, like you kill the head and the body will die. That became a very controversial statement to say when concussions became a problem, but it was still true. Like if you kill the head of the organization or the team or like the leader, the rest of the team's going to die, because like they lost their captain, their fearless leader. And that was true for the U.S. military. Like, some leader would get taken out and his whole platoon or his whole, everyone beneath him would get taken out. And so that's always been a war tactic. But that tactic was not working against Iraq. I should speak a little bit more like, I don't know specifically the specifics of the war, like, or any of the dealings, but this concept holds true, which was, they realized that was not working. Killing the head and the body will die. No, what would happen is they would kill the head and some other head would sprout up. Like, it would grow 10 more heads. And why did that happen? It was because there wasn't a bureaucracy of knowledge and information and memory and knowing. Everyone knew what the goal was. Everyone knew, whether you were a infantry person or the head of a bureaucracy. It was a very flat organization in Iraq. And what we learned from that was that works, and what we're using is an old system. And so what you now see in military is, like, we have much flatter of an organizational structure that's supported us. In order to win that war, that's what we had to do in order to actually, like, make any momentum. Mm-hmm. So General McChrystal is the man who's responsible for making that shift in the military, realizing that was the problem and making that shift. And he ended up starting a consulting business that goes and does that with organizations around the world, and implementing that same sort of thing. Because that same kind of bureaucracy was implemented into our businesses everywhere. That's why we have a chief executive officer, chief operations officer. That's all from military. Mm-hmm. And so now you're seeing a lot more flat structures and a lot more, like, kind of playing like in this, like, win-win mentality instead of like a win-lose, like up or down or like better than or worse. It's more like everyone's kind of on the same playing field, on the same team, on the same level. And the reason why you're able to do that is, the only way you're able to do that is with everyone knows what we're doing and why we're doing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a very interesting thought process around everyone's a leader, mm-hmm. but it's just, when is it your time to shine?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important strategy to have, because it empowers everybody, and everybody now takes ownership over the outcome. Mm-hmm. Leadership is a beautiful thing, but it's a very painful thing, because within leadership, you're not in charge of the outcome. You have no idea how the cards are going to be flipped over. However, you're responsible for the outcome no matter what. You're responsible for your response to that outcome and how to navigate everything that comes thereafter.
Right.
And so I think it's a very interesting paradox that you mentioned, because it over-delivers an information downstream. And there's a twofold ideation here. I've listened to a couple TED Talks on it. And some businesses in the past choose to be a little bit secretive. Only the leadership team has certain information, mm-hmm. and everybody else stays out of that. They kind of know they don't know stuff, but they kind of don't want to know. They don't really want to peek behind the curtain and see the finances. It's just like they want to do their job, and that's it. And then there's other organizations where it's super transparent and everybody knows. That creates a little bit of anxiety downstream, because now they're like, well, I'm doing my job, but the bottom line's not that good. Am I going to be able to keep my job? Am I going to be able to keep my health insurance? Like, what's going to happen to my family? And now there's these ruminating thoughts for people that maybe, I wouldn't say they're lower level, but they're not used to or accustomed or trained to manage that level of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Both systems can work.
Yeah.
But it comes with consistent training and practice and, quite frankly, exposure.
Yeah.
And the analogy that comes with this is, let's say we walk into a grocery store here in California. And then all of a sudden, some guy walks in and he's strapped with a machine gun on his leg. If you don't know that it's there, business as usual. You're in the produce section, you're grabbing some meat, you're connecting with your partner or a friend. You guys are just getting the things that you're there to get. Oh, you're checking things off on your grocery list. And then you see a machine gun. You're like, hey, did you see that? Changes the entire dynamic. Mm-hmm. Now you have information that is important, that keeps you, your family, and your tribe safe. that maybe is relevant to the outcome, but maybe was unnecessary maybe that guy happened to just have positive intentions.
That's so true. Yeah.
Right. And so there's a twofold thought ideation there that like, I don't know exactly which one is right. Is it transparency, or is it only the leadership team holds high level information and doesn't share everything downstream?
Yeah.
Both can work, but it starts with creating those expectations up front. Mm-hmm. And I think when we're looking at the realm of high performers, I don't think that it's important for everybody to know everything. And when we look back at the Patriots, why were they so successful? What did Belichick say to Julian Edelman and to Gronk and to all these different guys? Do your job. Brady, what was his job? To know everybody's job. He's part of that quote-unquote leadership team with Belichick.
Yeah.
And then over the course of time, as trust was built, everybody did their job consistently. What did that lead to? And man, here's a little bit more leash. Mm-hmm. Now you get to know a little bit more. You've been around for a little bit. You've proven yourself. You've got loyalty. You've got trust. You've got connection. And so the point that I'm making is not everybody needs to know everything.
Yeah.
But as they prove themselves consistently over the course of time, they earn the right to acquire more.
Yeah. And I think you prove that you can handle it too.
Exactly.
You know, you prove that you've been there enough, you've had enough repetitions, and you can handle a little bit more information.
And to take it even a step further per our conversation, there's not always a scorecard that says that. Yeah. These are things that are felt. If you and I go do workouts together consistently over time, and workout 3, you quit. Workout 4, you quit. Now in my mind, I don't have trust that you're going to stay with me throughout the entire suffer session. Mm-hmm. If you never quit, and it doesn't matter if I get last place or you get last place or we're both just chopping it up back and forth, if I know that you're going to just keep going, I'm like, this guy's reliable.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like a very poor analogy, but hopefully creates a reference point for our listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's cool, man.
Yeah.
Let's jump into emotional intelligence. At what point did that become something of interest for you? And how would you define that for people?
That's a good question. So my story, a big part of my story, I try not to make this my identity, but when I was young, my mom passed away when I was 15. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was, my mom played a really significant role in my life. She was a bit of that emotional outlet, that emotional support that I couldn't get from my brother or my dad. They just didn't have the capacity and are still kind of building that capacity to like connect emotionally and vulnerably. And so when my mom passed, it was like, oh shit, you know, I was for the first time like kind of without that. And I was craving that in ways. And I went to my first psychologist about a year later, because actually me and my dad were like kind of butting heads. Because honestly, we didn't have a relationship. My relationship was with my mom. My dad was like a little bit more of that traditional provider kind of role, like more of the pusher and more like the rule creator and more of that hammer, right? And so I didn't really feel like I knew my dad. And I remember when my mom passed away, he said, I feel like I got to build a relationship with you guys. Like, I feel like I need to like actually build a relationship because I don't have one. And I'm like, oh shoot, that's going to take a lot of work, you know? And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to really get there, you know? But when I went to that first psychologist, it was like, wow, someone actually is like, all the psychologist did was just ask me a few questions and just kind of let me talk. And it was the first time since my mom had passed that someone had ever done that for me. Just like kind of just held space is what you would say. And, you know, not try to like necessarily like adjust how I'm thinking, but basically just to let me come to my own conclusions. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that's what he was doing. But by the end of the hour-long session, he said, oh, okay. Well, it sounds like you got it all figured out then. And I can't tell you how medicinal that was for me to hear that at a stage in my life where I felt like I was a crazy one. Like I was overly emotional because no one else around me was emotional or like really upset about this death or at least visibly, you know, like showing it on their sleeve the way I was. And I just felt very alone in that. And so to have someone that got it, I guess, that kind of affirmed that for me and affirmed that I'm not crazy, was really helpful at a pretty scary time. So I just kind of latched onto that for the rest of my life. And, I ended up referring like my best friend to go see him who was going through something, and like, became a good friend of that psychologist. I still am good friends with him. He's become a mentor. And so like that, I mean, that's emotional. What I would say is like, that's emotional awareness, is like being aware of our emotions and like being able to have a space to process and like work through those things. A lot of us don't have that space because we don't create the space, especially men. So we never even like reach that brink of like emotional awareness, which is the first step to emotional intelligence. So, flash forward many years, when I was graduating college, I was faced with this transition, and I realized that a lot of former players like myself were taking their own lives from CTE and different, issues. I even had a best friend that took his own life after college, and he was actually in college in a dorm room. And, as I researched the topic of concussion more, I realized this was just as much of a brain issue as it was a mentally emotional issue. Like, it was kind of like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Did the concussion cause this, or did the emotional and like home life stuff cause this, and having like life set up beyond sports cause this? And as I researched more, I realized like, okay, if you really crack this open, you look at Aaron Hernandez is a great example, his documentary. Like, I'm not condoning anything he did, but like, he lived a very interesting life leading up to his death and his murder and all those things. And so, like, he was a closeted bisexual. He was abused by his father. I think he was sexually abused as a kid. There was all these things that came up in the documentary. And as you learn about, you realize like, oh, what was that like for him to live with in a college locker room at Florida, in a professional locker room in the Patriots? And I just started to like peel back the curtain and see like, oh, this is more than a brain issue. And the more doctors I talked to as well, the more doubt there was around like CTE being like a life sentence, basically. And so I started questioning like what this means for people. And I knew I wanted to kind of provide a solution around concussion and around the mental health struggles guys were going through, but I didn't know how. The best way I knew how, though, was to create space, to hold space, and to get guys in a room together. And so that's really how it kind of took off. And it started with emotional awareness, getting guys in a space where we can kind of open up confidentially and talk about what's going on. Now, is that sufficient? For most guys in the first year of their work, like, that's pretty damn sufficient. But if you stay too long in this emotional awareness thing, it tends to be a trap in my experience. Because if we go too far into what I would call our feminine, and we stay, even with a bad therapist, you can just stay with a bad therapist and they don't confront you. They don't like redirect you. They don't tell you what you need to hear. They don't coach you, A good therapist will coach you, will be direct with you, will be almost prescriptive with you. But therapists are pretty restricted in what they can say and how they can direct, right? What's beautiful about the coaching industry, and is why I got into it, was because I realized this is exactly what I need. I need someone to be direct with me. I need someone to be honest with me and tell me what I need to hear, and not take my bullshit all the time. Mm-hmm.
No, I love the context. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the willingness to be curious rather than judgmental, which is such a cliche thing to say, but it is very true in the sense of like, oh, I'm now recognizing that I carry these emotional thought patterns, and I'm not seeing them from other people. They're not landing on my awareness from them, but it's landing on my awareness from me. Now I'm going to be a little bit more curious and play a little hide and seek. Oh, it's actually there. They're just masking it better than me. And I have the courage and the willingness to show my vulnerability, because that's is also something that has given me success in the past. If I play angry, I perform better and I do the thing. And anger is a form of emotion. Mm-hmm. And then from there, just observing, like, what state do your teammates come in? Is somebody like kind of chirpy that day and they're vibing, they had a good day, had a great night out? Or is somebody a little bit low, they're tired, got dumped by their girlfriend, or their knees bothering them, they had stomach flu all night, whatever the circumstance is? Being able to observe and kind of just make reference points as to, you know, how you play, but then also taking it a step further, which is, wow, like somebody holding space for me did help solve my problem immediately. The best coaches provide for others the things that they also need. Mm-hmm. You recognize that, you turned it into a business, and now you're changing lives all over the world. But you made a great observation at the tail end of that, which is, and Rogan's talked about this many times, which is, if you're that guy that just talks about your problems all the time, the problems grow. If you don't have the ability to like, okay, like I'm acknowledging like what I'm going through right now is pretty tough. Let me acknowledge that. Let me give it a place to just be for a second. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. It's not going to hold on to me forever. I'm going to make the best of this circumstance. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to explore it. I'm going to deconstruct it. I'm going to allow this to be a trampoline into my next phase of life, or a bow and arrow into my next phase of life, as opposed to a trap door or a sunken black hole that just puts shackles on me. And rather than it being a part of my story, it becomes my story and my identity.
Right.
And I think that's where you make the healthy deconstruction around like, okay, let's first acknowledge what is bothering you. Mm-hmm. Let's acknowledge that you are a human being and you have emotions. You've buried them your entire life, and it's served you until it doesn't serve you anymore. Mm-hmm. Let's acknowledge the things going on. The way I think of acknowledging too, and I've said this to you before, you and I sitting on a bench in or underneath a tunnel, and cars are driving through, and we're seeing anxiety, we're seeing depression, we're seeing frustration, we're seeing heartbreak, we're seeing financial distress, we're seeing body dysmorphia, eating issues, whatever it is that lands on people's radar. We could probably all relate on some level to every single thing that I just said. Yeah. You're like, oh, that's not my problem. It's like, it probably was or is at some point.
You just don't realize it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you just don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
But I think like all of those things compose the human experience. But I can acknowledge those things like, hey, what up? I see you've like you visited me today for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. The lighting was off when I looked in the mirror, or somebody made a comment that now lives rent-free in between my ears for a second. You then make the choice to grant that thing a permission slip to live inside your head for the long term, or you make the choice to get in the car with that emotion for a period of time.
Right.
It needs to be impermanent. The only permanent thing in this life is impermanence.
Yeah.
Whether that's the loss of a loved one, whether that's an emotion, or whether that's a thing that happens, like, how do we deal with the things that have happened to us? The fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt. And that's what you're doing, is you're granting people the tools to access, because you can't use a fucking hammer for everything, man.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need different tools to navigate and explore.
Yeah. And
I think the cool thing here is A, holding space. Mm-hmm. B, granting very high performers, specifically men in your world right now, the permission to be more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And then you're taking it a step further of like, okay, I recognize what happened to you. I recognize why you have frustration. I have context now. Now we need to do something disruptive so you can move forward.
Exactly.
Peptides. There's been a lot of buzz about peptides and what they can do for the body, skin, muscles, and health. What exactly are they? And do they live up to the hype? Your body makes peptides. They are strings of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Peptide therapy involves using prescription-based peptides to help treat and manage a variety of health conditions to maximize performance. Peptides consist of 2 to 50 amino acids and are made naturally in the body to act as important signaling molecules for many physiological and cellular functions. There are over 7,000 known functions of peptides in the body, and adequate levels in the body are imperative for performing at optimal levels. Discover a transformative journey to optimal well-being with Livv Peptides. Livv Peptides offer a natural and effective approach to health support. Embrace the difference. Choose Livv for a path to vitality that prioritizes quality, innovation, and your unique wellness goals. My personal favorite is BPC 157 with thymosin beta for optimizing gut health, tissue regeneration, and healing. Head over to livvnatural.com and use code ALLSMITH for 20% off peptides. That's LIVVNATURAL.com with discount code ALLSMITH for 20% off peptides.
And, you hit the nail on the head. often it's anger. Often anger is like the thing that's like frustration or something that's coming up. And I always say that anger is a secondary emotion. It comes up as like the surface emotion, but it's like the primary emotion, like the core emotion of anger often is something like sadness, shame, or fear. So as men, we're kind of shown that like anger is a really great tool, like it was for me on the football field. But I would argue that a lot of that anger came from sadness and disappointment. And a lot of that grief that I was taking out on the field with me. And what's really powerful is when you ask a guy like, okay, what are you upset about or like angry about? Like you really have them feel it, have them actually take that time to process it and hold space for it. Not too long, but like enough to drop into it. They're usually feeling something a lot deeper, like disappointment, sadness, like, oh, like someone disappointed me, someone like crossed me, and that feels hurtful. Like I thought we had a connection, like my trust was broken. Think of situations where you've had that happen, you know, that hurts. That's like a pain in the heart, which shows up as anger often, right? What would it be like to process that anger as sadness? Like to actually move the sadness through your body and not let it kind of hold on in your gut, you know? That's the power of uncovering what's beneath the anger. Same goes for guilt. If you're feeling like a lot of people get angry or defensive. One of my clients is a former pro soccer player, and he's found that with his wife, he'll get defensive. He texts me like, hey, like, why do I get defensive when my wife says like I did this wrong or like, you know, forgot to do this? And I find myself getting defensive. I'm like, well, what wound are you trying to protect? Like what is anger trying to protect you from feeling? What are you defending? And he had to kind of think about it. He's like, oh, like I actually feel a little guilty. I think she's kind of right. So I'm getting defensive because I actually think part of her is right. And I'm not willing to admit that in the moment. So when he's able to feel the guilt or the shame that he's feeling around that, he's able to realize that the anger was just a front. And he can communicate that. You know, he can be like, oh, like I take responsibility for that. How many guys out there like have a hard time taking responsibility for like just those little things, you know, like, you know, especially if you've apologized a few times for something and then it pops up again, you don't want to apologize again. You don't want to take responsibility again. That's like the 5th time this week, you know, like I thought I was working on this. So it can feel really discouraging and embarrassing to bring that up. And so it can be natural just to go to anger. So like you're saying, yes, that's how you hold space for the emotion. That's how you like get underneath what's underneath the emotion, right? And
we'll
that
peek under the hood.
Exactly. Peek under the hood. That allows you to communicate more effectively. It allows you to own up to your mistakes, own up to your shortcomings, and more importantly, chart a new path forward. Instead of focusing on what you're afraid of or shameful of or upset about. Okay, if that's what happened, what do I want instead? If I feel crossed by that person, how do I set a boundary next time? How do I state, hey, this is what I want out of our relationship. This really hurt me. This is what I want. And this is what I'm willing to do to go create that with you. Are you down with that? And that's
an interesting one. That's tough, I think.
It's really tough.
And the reason why I'm gonna try to bridge it to sports real quick. It's like, if you cross me wrong in the locker room, I might intrinsically think, oh, I'm going to get him on the field.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it might be like, oh, I'm going to hit him with a great block, or I'm going to tackle him, or, you know, in basketball, I'm going to hit a hard screen, or I'm going to beat him in sprints, or I'm going to get a bucket, and I'm going to let him know I got a bucket. And it's one of those things where it's like you can be spiteful and vengeful in sport because it doesn't cause harm in real life.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes you have to take the metaphorical analogy of that and think about how it's going to be transferable in real life. And what I'm curious with you is, like, you've done a great job identifying today how we get people to a vulnerable state and allow them to be rather than do. They can get comfortable sitting with their emotions and recognize their existence and create emotional awareness. But how do you then create buy-in around, okay, that's phase one. Information gathered from historical reference in the past. How do you then create buy-in, and the next step being confidence, to then move forward? Because there's two types of confidence that you've talked about, which is like real confidence And it's that fake bravado confidence that maybe you can operate with and gain success on the field or on the court, but that doesn't always have the transferability into life, business, or entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Well, confidence is a relationship with yourself. And I say that in two ways. You can build confidence in any arena you want, right? You can build confidence with an action, you know? I can get really good at a certain action, but that just makes me more better at that action. And where confidence really comes into play, like self-confidence, self-trust, is being in alignment with myself. And we can't be in alignment with ourselves if we're not in tune with ourselves. So that's really where that core identity work comes in. Like, am I operating from something that I want to do, or am I doing it because I feel guilty about something, or I don't want to, I'm afraid someone's going to not be my friend if I don't do this. Am I doing it like out of something like I truly want to do? For instance, like, you ever been guilted into like calling your grandma or something like that, like calling your aunt like on her birthday or something like that? It's like, I don't want to call her just because like my parent told me I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
I want to do it because I actually want to. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's a big difference.
There's a big difference, and it feels out of alignment. You feel this cognitive dissonance when you do those kinds of things. Yeah, you might feel better afterwards. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll do it next time. But like, confidence comes from doing things in alignment with yourself. When you don't listen to your gut, when you act out of alignment, you can feel that conflict and that tension and that tightness in your chest.
But how do you teach people to listen to their gut that have never listened to their gut before? They showed up to practice, strength coach yelled at them, so they just did the thing.
You got to slow down.
Right? And it's like, I think that's the big one that I'm curious about is like, I agree with everything you're saying. I align with everything you're saying. And it's been developed, at least for a stubborn guy like myself, through extreme pain. And through that pain, I've been able to learn the lessons or seek the guidance. But I think some people don't necessarily experience that level of pain. They experience, this person's yelling at me, so I'm going to do the thing. And then they go out and they do the successful thing. And like, I have friends that played in the NFL for 10 plus years that have never thought about emotional intelligence, that have never thought about any of these things, have tens of millions of dollars in the bank. And then when they finish, they're left with this feeling. Doesn't matter the money, doesn't matter their family and their kids. They're left with, wow, it's over. Nobody gets it. I'm never going to play in front of 50,000 again. Mm-hmm. Now when I go to the Christmas party, people don't say, hey, how are you? They say, oh, what are you doing now? The famous question of like validating you for what you do and not giving any form of reference as to like, hey, how are you doing? You did that for a really long time. Like, how's your body? How's your mind? Like, are you gaining some peace in this next phase where maybe it's not so chaotic, the travel's a little bit less, but we don't humanize people.
No.
We almost judge and we attack based on what we know, but I don't think it's purposeful. I think, like, at least for myself, I think people struggled to connect with me because for over a decade, people are like, hey, how's basketball? Or, hey, I saw you in the newspaper. Or, hey, I saw you on that website. Or I saw the box score. You scored a lot of points. That was how they connected. And that was like their deconstruction of anxiety to give them like a tool of something to say.
Right. Yeah.
And so I don't fault them now. But in the moment,
that's so true.
The younger, less mature version of myself is like, what do I do now? What do you think I do now? Like, I wanted to get defensive, and I took it personal right off the bat because I didn't think about their lenses.
Yeah.
I thought about my own, and I thought about the pain that I was in because I didn't know what was to come next, and my body was hurting, and I was so used to getting these accolades that it was like, how do we teach people to be more human becomes the question for me.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I mean, when I played, and even when I would like, even to this day, when I see like a pro player or something like that, first of all, I don't watch a lot of sports. I'm not like a fan. So like I can treat those guys as a human. It's like just natural for me. It's like, I know if I was in your shoes, I would want to be treated like a human. So I know it's possible. Yeah. And the second piece is like, the way you humanize guys is you actually get them in a room together with each other. Mm-hmm. And what happens is like these guys actually start talking about those kinds of situations or those frustrations, and they find more permission to open up and talk about these things, and they look around, they're like, oh shit, you guys are feeling that same way? Like, You feel like you're all alone in this. You feel like you're not measuring up to the level of success you used to have. You keep getting that asked that question at the holidays. And it's like the pressure in the room just drops.
Because people get it.
Yes.
You don't have to sit there and explain it 15 fucking times.
Yeah. It just is. It just is. And the pressure comes off and the weight on your shoulders drops. For the first time in a long time, you feel like, yeah, you're in a place where guys get it. And that's what so many veterans feel when they come back from war. That's what so many veterans from the NFL feel when they come back from war, you know? Yeah. It's like no one gets it. No one understands the kind of work that I did to get there. No one knows what crazy crap I did overseas, you know? No one knows what it's like to sleep, you know, like on a tarp in the desert, you know what I mean? Like, and so when you're in regular day life, like people don't get it. And so I think there's an integration process that needs to happen.
I like the way you said that, an integration process. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I've been on retreats like this. I've been on expeditions with former special forces guys, and I've seen how they operate and how they deal with the integration into real life. And it's exactly the same as former players.
Mm-hmm. How do you navigate the false bravado, the fake confidence that maybe is ingrained a little bit in the DNA? Because you think of the structure of like, if I have the thing, I can do the thing, and then I can be the person. So if I have the starting job, let's say starting quarterback,
yeah,
I can do the thing, and then I'll be the person.
Yeah.
And then you get injured, you bounce around the NFL for a couple of years as a backup quarterback, and then you phase out. You got a little bit of money. People know you for who you once were, not for who you are, which really sucks.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, you have to be the person that does the thing.
Right.
That can then have the stuff, the notoriety, the business, the connections, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it takes, as our good friend Anthony Truck says, you have to do the work in the dark so you can shine in the light.
Yeah.
And that's where confidence is formed, right? It's a proof of concept that I do the thing when you're not watching. Whether you give me a pat on the ass, a slap on the back, or a clap, I'm going to keep doing the thing because I know it's the next right thing. And it aligns very much with one of my favorite analogies, which is put your damn grocery cart away.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you teach guys to do the work in the dark so that they can shine in the light? Because it's thankless.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It takes consistency. And it's the micro actions in the day-to-day that make the macro actions in the light later.
Yeah.
But it's tough to make the bed every day. It's tough to always do the dishes when you don't want to. It's tough to send that text when you're thinking about somebody, when you've sent 55 texts that day and you've been burying yourself in email and you've got financial distress and your body hurts.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you teach guys about the micro actions in order to have actual confidence and real confidence over the course of time when they probably don't know what they don't know? It might be something you guys identify together.
Well, that's the truth. We do identify it together. So what we talk about with emotional awareness is like you usually stir up what's going on, what's really underneath all this. And therefore, okay, now that I know this, once we spend enough time on that, okay, now we go to the next step, which is what am I inspired to do? What have I left unsaid? What needs to be done? What specifically would stretch me outside my comfort zone just enough to get me into what I call flow state? And they studied this. It's not a 10% stretch outside your comfort zone. That usually ends in consistent failure, and like you kind of like get this unconscious resistance where you don't want to go back out there and stretch again and do something risky. So, and you don't want to stay the same. You don't want to stay inside your comfort zone. You don't want to do like a 1% or 2% stretch. You actually want to do a 4% stretch. So we teach this to guys, and they know what it feels like. You know what it feels like too. It's like that kind of like, it's like that butt pucker kind of feeling, like, oh, like I don't really want to do this, but like I'll do it.
It's the ice bath.
It is, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same analogy. It's like I don't want to do it, but I know it's going to feel better once I rip the Band-Aid off. And we did this just in Zion. I told you I went to Zion on my coach's men's retreat this past weekend, and we were there for 5 days, and we hiked 20 miles in the Narrows, and we also spent a whole day doing this work too. We spent this time doing like emotional awareness work. What's really going on? If you really knew me, what would you know? What's one thing I'm afraid to tell you? And we went all out, man. And then we did some exercises to break through some of those things that we know are holding us back. And everyone got put on a stretch after that retreat. And that's what we do in our groups too. This our communities and every coaching client I have. You're not just coming out of this call, staying in your puddle. We're going to get you in fucking action. Like, because I spent so many years, honestly, in that place, like in that puddle. I've seen both sides of the coin, you know, because after football, I kind of went and did I went and explored yoga. I went and explored emotional awareness, and all those things were incredibly powerful for me because I hadn't had space in so many years, right? I got this like taste of peace, shavasana, if you've done yoga, you know, and it's like, wow, rest can be productive, right? And so you learn that, and then it's like, okay, sometimes you can have too much of that, right? So you have to jump back in and sort of what I call close the loop. If I had a diagram, I'd show you my process. It's like so many guys get stuck on one side of the coin or the other. They get stuck in the feelings of it, or they get stuck in like the constant action. And neither of those are sufficient for
it's the yin to the yang. There needs to be lightness with darkness, hot and cold.
Exactly.
There needs to be contrast. Otherwise, the dosage seemingly is a little bit off, or your chi maybe is off.
Your chi, yeah, exactly. And that's actually the diagram. I'd love to show it to you sometime because it is the yin yang. It's the balance of the two. So there's just as much, you need to slow down. You need to feel what's going on. You need to have faith that these emotions have something to tell you. And then you need to get into action. You need to hold yourself accountable to that. And then you need to take ownership for your results and like getting back into the flow and taking that same cycle back, getting back on it. So when I say we stretch, I mean, that's the action component, and we hold each other accountable to that. So each guy will come up with something tangible. One guy, I mean, he went home and told his significant other that he was unfaithful like years prior. And like, that was just eating at him. And you would have never expected it from this guy. That's the other thing, man. Like you would never expect some of the things these guys say, you know, because they're holding on this like armor, this mask, and they're holding up this false bravado that like is just like every other guy out there, you know, who's having beers at the restaurant, and like maybe they'll open up after 10 beers, you know, to their best friend once in a while. But like, it's these regular guys that have these deep pains, these deep blocks that are holding them back from moving forward in a real way in their life. And so if we don't confront those things, if we continue to let those things simmer, they will eat us alive, man.
But something I've seen, and I've experienced this firsthand, and we've talked about this in depth before. Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyan Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyan is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinyan's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyan.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey. First of all, society doesn't grant guys the permission. They judge them. Oh, you're soft, right? How many times have we heard that in the locker room? Like, oh, I'm not talking about this. That's soft.
I literally spoke at USC and I asked them, why would you not talk about something like this? Why would you not bring it up? And they're like 5 of the guys were like, oh, I'd come off as soft.
And the thing that's interesting is you want to be vulnerable, but then it's weaponized against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it becomes a timing issue, and it becomes a personnel, KYP, know your personnel.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like you don't tell everything to everybody.
You don't. No.
And you don't just word vomit
Right.
on your first date.
Right.
Right? Like you have to pick the time, the space, and the attention. And I think what's interesting is when you've buried it for so long, it might be beers, it might be a men's retreat, it might be a sauna cold plunge experience.
Yeah.
It might be the end of a tough workout.
Mm-hmm.
You might lose a loved one and just fully get to a breaking point
Yeah.
where the volcano erupts.
Yeah.
And I think what you're kind of trying to share today is like you're trying to give people an outlet to diffuse some of that pressure within the balloon,
Mm-hmm.
so they can maintain this regulated consistency, not float off to the abyss, but also not deflate.
You're hitting the nail on the head. Yeah. Because, sometimes we do need that kind of boiling point to remind us that it's once in a while, it's time to let off some steam, like, oh, I'm not going to let it get to that point again. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's really what the groups are for. It creates that space for that, sometimes that explosive moment, and it's in a safe space with guys. It's not with your significant other. You're not dumping on them and creating this weird dynamic. Honestly, that creates a lot of struggles in relationships. It's guys dumping emotionally on their partner. Mm-hmm. It's not it sounds nice, but you're right. It gets used against you, and in some
it probably also decreases a level of attraction.
Polarity. Yeah.
So it's an interesting dichotomy that it's like you think that it's a safe space with your significant other, but going back to that KYP, too much dosage too soon or at the wrong time, that can put out a flame real quick.
Yeah, I mean, if you go into like the history of why men's work, like that's what this is. This is men's work applied to athletes. Why do we have men's work? It's because we replaced going out for a hunt in the morning with all the guys, all the elders and all the young kids went out for a hunt every morning to go fetch today's food for the village. We replaced that with water cooler talk at work in our suit and tie. We have to hold things back because it's not work related, not safe for work, right? We've domesticated ourselves. We've sharpened ourselves. We put this veil on.
Don't talk about that. It's not professional.
Exactly.
Right? And the water cooler talk becomes, hey, let's hit this quick hit of caffeine so we can go back and make money.
Right.
As opposed to what we described previously, which is, hey, man, I haven't seen you in a little bit. Like, how's your family doing?
Right.
How's your significant other? How was that trip to Zion? Like actually connecting with people, which then builds trust. And then productivity in the workplace is actually probably better.
Yeah. I could go on and on for that, man. Yeah. I tried that at my old job and it didn't really go anywhere. It's really too bad. We even led some emotional intelligence workshops at my job and like it caught on, but like it wasn't really going to catch on until it got to leadership, which, as a leader, I could go on a whole tangent on that too. You have to be able to be at least a little bit vulnerable and open in order to encourage other people to do the same and to connect. If people don't know you, they can't trust you, they're not going to follow you.
Yeah.
But I feel like I need to get back on track. There was something we were talking about around stretching or...
You were just talking about that 4% with men's groups. And like, I like thinking about Brian Peters' analogy of seeking edges.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, but it's like right at that edge, maybe the research shows 4% in either direction. And some days that's going to be reaching for the low hanging fruit. But like if every time you're climbing a 17-foot ladder to get the apple at the top, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so it's like the low-hanging fruit's kind of boring sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea that I'm hearing in my mind is like, you want to jump forward a little bit. You want your friend to get on all fours. You jump off his back maybe to go get it. You want that ladder that's like, I don't really feel like climbing that right now. But if I do, I know that apple is going to be juicier than this apple.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of what was coming to mind for me.
I mean, you're right. And like I told you about that hike in Zion. It was 20 miles. I was wearing shoes that were too small for me. Like we thought the hike was going to be 15 miles because that's what it says on the map if you go to Zion. But then we get on the hike and it turns out to be 20. And it's in like water on rocks and it's treacherous and you're carrying a stick. And I lost a toenail. It's going to pop off in a couple of days. But what that is though, is that's what's called, I think it's called type 2 fun or type 3 fun. And So type 1 fun is like you go out and you know what you're getting into. Like, oh, I'm going to go hike Cowles Mountain. It's what, 5 miles or something like that. Oh, great. Okay, I know what I'm getting into. Everyone does that hike. I'm going to come down. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. But
I know what I'm doing and what we're getting into. Type 2 or type 3 fun is where something crazy happens. And you go through something really unexpected and you have that butt pucker moment like, oh, shit, are we going to make it? And it's in those moments, similar to going to war, similar to playing sports as a group of guys, where you bond, you connect, and you go through hard shit together. And you realize you're not in this alone. Mm-hmm. And you got through that. And you can look back and be like, holy fuck, that was crazy. Yeah. But I'm so glad I had that conversation with my wife. I'm so glad I went after that promotion. I'm so glad I started that business, dude. Like, looking back 5 years ago, like, holy shit, I would be a different person if I didn't make that choice. And you look back and you're connecting with guys that you like, you trust, you know, you love, that you've built that connection with, that openness with. There's nothing better, man. Like, it's like you're a part of a team again. That's what we live for. So many guys have lost that brotherhood, that camaraderie, and it's just really, it's too bad. I could use more of it too. That's one reason why we've become super close, you know? Like,
and I totally agree with you. And I also think that, like, tribal connection is probably one of the most important things to the human experience.
Yes.
And to longevity. I mean, we could look at respiratory health, muscular development. We could talk about VO2 max. We could talk about habits, consistency, sunlight, stress management, blood health, biomarkers, all the things. At least from what I've seen and when I've had deathbed conversations from people very close to me and currently my mom, the most important element of the human experience is healthy, meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is you form those bonds that are seemingly forced in the beginning because of the common goal of sport. Mm-hmm. But then over the course of time, they're the people you hang out with, the people you call when things are rough. When you're moving out of your dorm room, they're coming to help you out. You're having meals together. You might be taking trips together.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my memes and DMs are with a lot of ex-teammates.
Yeah.
And it's like there is a tribal connection that gets lost. And then there's a beauty within church, men's groups, CrossFit communities or fitness communities.
Yep.
Where what the magic is not just the product, but it's the fact that you go to the same place almost every day at almost the same time and you cross paths and you get to chop it up.
Yeah.
The thing that's frustrating for me that I want to explore with you as we wrap up today's conversation is we've got preventative medicine and we've got reactive medicine. Mm-hmm. Reactive medicine is insurance-based. It's highly monetized. And there's great research development that's typically manipulated by big pharma and companies that have a lot of money, but also have an agenda. Preventative medicine is not monetized that well. It's easy to put the title coach. It's not always easy to put the title doctor. Mm-hmm. However, I know a lot of coaches that do a lot of amazing things. I know a lot of doctors that do a lot of amazing things. I know poor performers on both sides of those as well. Mm-hmm. Same game with lawyers, same game with firefighters and what police officers, whatever other type of podcasters. Yeah. You could put that title good, mediocre, poor on anybody. But the point that I'm making is it's very difficult to monetize the men's group. It's difficult to monetize the retreat to Zion.
Yeah.
It's difficult to create a long-standing business association with the things that we know work.
Yeah.
We've felt work.
Yeah.
And it's like, my question is like, how do we change that narrative? It's not going to be an insurance model, at least in our lifetime.
No.
But how do we create the narrative inside of the mind of people to recognize that this investment can change your life for the better long term?
It's my life's work. That's my life's work is to figure that out and to continuously iterate on that and get this into, like, create a paradigm shift. I told you I was going to try and create a paradigm shift today, right? And it's sort of this adage of like, if not now, when? You know, it's like if you don't do it now, when will it ever come around? If you don't create the connection, if you don't create the camaraderie now, when will it happen? It's
Which
not
is
just
why I
gonna fall.
texted you yesterday.
Exactly. That's why we're here, man. You know?
We dissect failure a lot more than we dissect success.
Yeah.
Why is that something that is coming to mind as we're concluding today's conversation? Because we're chatting with successful people that can't seem to figure out the bridge into the next version of their life. Why do we then dissect the negatives as to why they are what they are versus let's dissect the negatives and let's figure out how to highlight these things in the next chapter?
I love that. Embrace the weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's what a lot of us are afraid to do, is embrace the weakness. That's really what the work is based off of. And it's about sharing the story and opening up and allowing people to support you and not fearing your weakness. From a spiritual perspective, God works through weakness. It's because when we surrender, we are lifted up, we're supported, we're guided. We can't expect ourselves to grip through life. We can't expect ourselves to high perform through life. We have to trust something else. We have to trust our weakness. We have to trust that we can't do everything. Just like that hierarchy, the person up top can't do everything. It needs support. It needs someone to fill in when it can't be there. And in order to do that, it has to share the information. It has to share the wealth.
I love getting to know your story, man. I love getting to know what some of this men's work is that you're doing with people. When you get asked the question, which you get asked a lot, who am I without sports? How do you steer that conversation?
Well, I actually have an exercise in my program where I actually ask guys to introduce themselves. They usually lead with sports, and then I ask them to introduce themselves without mentioning sports, and it's a wildly different conversation, and they think of all kinds of different things. But I like that. That comes back. It's challenging, and after that exercise, guys are like, "Oh wow, I felt really connected to this group. This is pretty cool." We're not talking about what I do professionally or what sport I play, what school I went to. We're actually getting into it. Okay, I see what this is all about. So
it's a different flavor that they're not used to.
Yeah, and you have to lead. That's one thing I've learned is guys don't, doing things like this, talking about my story, sharing and opening up and being, as vulnerable as I can with you, that. That's what guys are attracted to. They're like, oh, I can get behind that. When you lead with authenticity, I think guys will want to join you where you're going. So that's the one thing I try to do is give them permission to know who they are and be themselves. That's really what this is about.
I like that, man. One of my favorite things about you aligns from a famous Emerson quote, and that is, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail."
Yeah.
And I think you're doing that. I think there's a lot of people that conclude one element of their life. Today's conversation was about sport. But I think they conclude one thing, and then they're hit with, as Matthew McConaughey would say, a red light or a yellow light. And they can't really sit in that space to figure out what comes next, not knowing that if they deconstruct it a little bit, there are transferable skills in almost any arena into another arena. And that this world that we live in, at least America, was constructed by a bunch of dudes smoking cigarettes, drinking some whiskey, and trying to piece together puzzled ideas. We can all figure this out, and instilling that level of confidence and realizing that we all put our pants on the same way, it takes time, energy, attention, and focus to then steer the ship in the direction that we believe will create change, or at the very least be gently disruptive to leave a paw print when we move on to the next chapter of life, I think is very special. And it takes courage, it takes honor, it takes difficult conversations, and the willingness to be lonely and be misunderstood. And a lot of people think about, or at least I do, I think about that caterpillar. And that's where you were as an athlete, trying to figure it out, your boots on the ground, kind of doing the thing. And then that ends and you go into the cocoon. And while you're in the cocoon, it's this psychological deconstruction of, on the other side, am I going to be a moth? Am I going to be a butterfly? Maybe I heard whispers of that, but I really don't know. Right now, I think I'm going to die. But I have all these ideas inside. And I don't want to die with them still inside. To me, that is the definition of hell, is like dying with your ideas and your songs still inside.
It is.
But then there comes a moment where you're tired of the shit and you just start to break out of that cocoon. And then a little thing comes out. And you still are uncertain for so long. And you're so misunderstood. And you don't have the tribe from before. You don't align with the same people you used to hang out with all the time that talked about the same things, and it was just this ruminating hamster wheel, stuck in the matrix and the rat race. But you also haven't graduated to this like peak form of success where you feel like you're aligned and understood, and you know the entrepreneurial space over here where you feel like you made it, whether you do or not. You have that feeling, and it's lost in the messy middle. And Alan Watts talks about it, and he says, "You've never not made it. You're always going to make it, but you're going to spend the entire time thinking you won't." And I pause purposefully at the end of that statement because you're there.
Yeah.
And I'm there.
Yeah.
And it's feeling of lost. It's feeling misunderstood. It's feeling lonely. But when you're that passionate, what did I text you the other night? Keep going.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to understand it. Nobody's going to put all the assets towards it, the time, the energy, and attention, but you have to believe in you.
Yeah.
The same way that person believed in you, it said, "Hey, man, nice arm."
Yeah.
And that's where I want to wrap things up today, man.
I love that, man. I love that. Keep going. We all need that.
For sure, man. That was special. I'm excited to chop it up again. I feel like we can go 17 layers deep.
Me too, man. There's a lot more to cover.
Totally. Guys, thank you for listening to today's episode of ALLSMITH. If you enjoyed my conversation with Q Williams, check him out on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle? Where can people find you?
Q Williams, 2 underscores at the end.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a website, or where can people kind of connect with your program?
Yeah, q-williams.com lists my my programs. If you want to like talk about the community that I run, it's not really on the website. It's more like on the back end. So just reach out to me directly, shoot me a DM. I'd love to just start a conversation with you.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Guys, if you enjoyed my conversation with Q today, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Until next time.